Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The morning sun poured softly into their small sitting room, gliding across the old family portraits that still carried the scent of warmth and laughter. Kamsi, only 14 then, watched her father struggle to sit upright on the wooden bed. His skin looked pale, his eyes tired, but his smile still carried the same fire it always had when he looked at her. "My little lion," he said faintly, his rough hands trembling as he reached for her. She rushed into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of dust, palm oil, and home. He told her to promise never to let anyone make her feel small. Even though the air was thick with sickness and fear, he tried to sound strong. "You will grow into something great, Kamsi," he whispered, his voice fading like smoke. That was the last morning she ever felt safe. By evening, her father's breathing had slowed, and the hospital nurse, tired and underpaid, shook her head. "He's gone," she muttered. The sound of those two words shattered Kamsi's world like glass. She screamed, clutching his cold arm, her mother Ngozi wailing beside her. Yet somehow, even in grief, Kamsi's heart sensed that something inside her mother broke in a way that would never heal right again. The weeks that followed turned their once lively home into a grave of silence. The television stayed off. The radio, once filled with Papa Kamsi's favorite highlife songs, collected dust. Ngozi stopped cooking regularly. She would sit in the corridor staring at nothing, her wrapper half-tied, eyes hollow. Kamsi tried to fill the gap. She cooked, cleaned, even helped their neighbors just to keep busy. But no matter what she did, her mother barely noticed. Whenever Kamsi mentioned her father, Ngozi would snap, "He's gone. Stop talking about him." It felt like her mother wanted to erase him completely. At night, Kamsi still heard her mother crying softly, sometimes talking to herself about how life cheated her. Once, Kamsi overheard her whispering on the phone to an old friend, saying, "I can't do this alone. I need someone." That was the first time Kamsi felt true fear, not the kind that comes from the dark, but from realizing that her mother was slipping away from the woman her father had left behind. Months passed, and their finances dwindled. Papa Kamsi's workshop was sold to settle debts, and their old car was repossessed. Kamsi wore the same brown sandals for a year, her school fees always delayed. Yet she held onto her father's memory like an anchor. She would visit his grave and tell him everything. "Mama's not herself anymore," she'd whisper to the red soil. "But I'll be strong like you said." At home, Ngozi's behavior grew stranger. She started going out late, dressing differently, and giving on phone calls Kamsi wasn't allowed to hear. Whenever Kamsi asked where she was going, Ngozi would bark, "Don't question me. I'm still your mother." And though Kamsi nodded quietly deep inside, she felt the first painful crack forming between them, a silent line dividing love and distrust. She didn't know it yet, but her world was about to shift again, this time not by death, but by betrayal wearing a friendly smile. The first day Patrick came into their home, he brought with him a smell of fresh cologne and deceit. He was a tall man with a neatly shaved beard and a soft-spoken voice that immediately disarmed Ngozi. "Madam, you don't look like someone who should be struggling alone," he said with that smooth smile that made Kamsi's stomach turn. He claimed to be a neighbor's friend, there to fix a faulty door hinge. He offered to help repair the broken kitchen tap too, insisting it was no trouble at all. From that day, he became a regular face, always bringing bread or provisions for the family, always insisting Kamsi call him Uncle Patrick. At first, Kamsi tried to be polite. She would greet him and stay out of sight, but she couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered when she walked by. It wasn't admiration, it was something colder, predatory, like a snake waiting to strike. Ngozi, however, saw something entirely different. To her, Patrick was kindness wrapped in charm. He told her how beautiful she still looked for a widow, how she deserved happiness again, how he respected how she raised her daughter alone. Every compliment dug deeper into Ngozi's loneliness. Soon she began laughing again, dressing better, cooking elaborate meals whenever he visited. Kamsi noticed it all, how her mother's eyes brightened when Patrick was around, how she started saying things like, "It's good to have a man in the house again." Kamsi tried to tell her she felt uncomfortable. "Mama, he looks at me strangely," she said one evening after dinner. Ngozi waved her hand dismissively. "You're imagining things. He's just trying to be friendly." Kamsi felt helpless, watching her mother slowly fall into a trap she couldn't see. Patrick started finding reasons to stay longer, helping Ngozi wash plates, fetching water, even repairing light switches that weren't broken. It was clear he was building something, not just with her mother, but within their home. Over time, Patrick began testing limits. He would sit too close when Kamsi served food. He would ask questions like, "Do you have a boyfriend?" in that teasing tone that made her blood freeze. She avoided him, but he seemed amused by her discomfort. Once, she caught him staring at her reflection through the mirror in the corridor, pretending to adjust his wristwatch. She ran into her room and locked the door, heart pounding. When she told her mother again, Ngozi laughed and said, "Ah, Kamsi, you watch too many films. That man is helping us, and you're there talking nonsense." It hurt. For the first time, Kamsi realized that her mother didn't believe her anymore, or worse, didn't care to. That night, she lay awake, whispering to her late father, "Papa, someone has entered our house, and Mama can't see him for who he is." The darkness felt heavier than ever, pressing down on her chest like a warning. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that pretends to be peaceful before chaos strikes. Ngozi had gone to the market with a friend, leaving Kamsi home alone. Patrick arrived unexpectedly, claiming he came to check the leaking bathroom pipe. She didn't want him inside, but before she could protest, he walked straight in. "I just want to fix it," he said with a smirk that didn't match his words. Kamsi stood frozen as he moved past her into the small bathroom. She heard the tap running, then silence. When she turned, he was standing by the door, watching her. "You've grown so fast," he said softly. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She muttered, "Please, my mother will soon be back," and ran into the sitting room. He smiled and left minutes later, but that smile lingered in her mind long after he was gone. She locked the door the rest of the day and cried quietly on her bed, shaking from a fear she couldn't name. When Ngozi returned, Kamsi tried to explain, trembling. "He was here, Mama. He looked at me in a way I don't like." Ngozi sighed impatiently. "You're being rude to the man helping us. He's not like that." Her tone carried irritation, not concern. Kamsi's voice broke. "Mama, he's not a good man." But Ngozi's face hardened. She saw her daughter's fear as rebellion, not warning. "You're becoming too suspicious, Kamsi. Don't drive people away." That night, as her mother laughed on the phone with Patrick, Kamsi sat by the window, watching the moon. She whispered to her father again, tears streaming, "If you can hear me, protect me. Please." From that day, she began sleeping with a chair pressed behind her bedroom door. It became her small act of defiance, her silent alarm. When Ngozi discovered it the next morning, she was furious. "Why are you behaving like a mad person? Is this what I raised?" she shouted. Kamsi didn't answer. She simply looked down at the floor and swallowed her fear. Later, she started writing letters to her late father in an old-school notebook, letters she never sent, but which became her only comfort. "I wish you were here, Papa. Mama doesn't see what's happening. He smiles like a friend, but feels like danger. I'm scared." Each letter was a cry into silence, a desperate attempt to hold on to her sanity in a house that no longer felt like home. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her torment. The storm had only started to gather. There was something different in the way her mother looked at her now. The warmth that used to soften her sternness was gone. It was replaced by suspicion and irritation, as though Kamsi had become a burden she could no longer bear. The distance between them wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical. Whenever Kamsi tried to speak, her words were met with cold glares or dismissive shrugs. One morning, as she quietly prepared yam porridge in the kitchen, she heard Patrick whispering to Ngozi in the bedroom. His voice was too low to make out the words, but the tone was smug, satisfied, calculated. Later that evening, Ngozi called Kamsi to the sitting room with a strange look on her face. "You've been behaving strangely," she began. "I don't like the way you talk to Patrick. You don't greet him well. You act rude." Kamsi blinked in disbelief. Mama, I don't feel safe around him. But Ngozi snapped, don't think because you're growing breast, you can disrespect my friend. He's helping us. The words hit Kamsi like a slap. Her mother wasn't just ignoring her warnings now. She was defending the man who made her skin crawl. Patrick had become more confident in his presence, walking freely around the house like a landlord. He'd sit in the parlor with his legs crossed, watching the TV while Kamsi moved cautiously past him, always avoiding eye contact. He made little comments that felt like sharp needles against her pride. Young girls these days are too forward, he'd say while Ngozi laughed beside him. Once he chuckled as she walked past and said, better close your legs, small madam. Kamsi stopped mid-step, her entire body stiffening. But Ngozi said nothing. She didn't even flinch. Kamsi stood in that moment, stunned, her heart roaring like thunder in her ears. She turned slowly, looked at her mother, and asked softly, did you hear that? But Ngozi, without taking her eyes off the television, replied, don't provoke him, Kamsi. That night, Kamsi didn't eat. She stared at the ceiling, clutching the old photo of her father, the only man who had ever protected her. She whispered, they're turning our home into a stranger's playground. The betrayal deepened when Kamsi overheard her mother on the phone again, this time speaking about her. She's becoming disrespectful. I don't know what to do with her. Patrick says she's even rude to him now. That night, Kamsi confronted her. You're choosing him over me, she said, voice trembling but firm. Ngozi flared up instantly, slamming the watered jug on the table. You think you know everything, because you're in senior secondary school now? Let me tell you, that man respects me. He listens. Unlike you. Kamsi felt the sting deep in her chest. Her mother wasn't just blind. She was now actively placing her in harm's path. She walked into her room, locked the door, and began packing her important items into a nylon bag. Not because she planned to run away, but because something inside her had shifted. Her body still remained under the roof, but emotionally, Kamsi was already leaving. She began praying each night, not just for safety, but for a miracle that would free her from the slow poison brewing inside her home. The atmosphere in the house changed completely after that night. Patrick's steps grew heavier, more entitled, as though Ngozi's silence had given him full license to do whatever he pleased. He no longer knocked before entering rooms, no longer masked his intent with fake politeness. Kamsi began to map out his movements like a soldier planning for war. She memorized the creak of the floorboards, the shift of the doorknob, and the smell of his cologne, a scent that now felt like danger itself. One evening, she was washing plates in the kitchen when he crept behind her. His presence was quiet, but her body tensed the moment she sensed him. Then, without warning, his hand brushed slowly across her shoulder. She jumped, spun around, and stared at him with burning eyes. He smiled. Why are you acting like you're still a child? He asked, voice low and confident. She didn't answer. She wiped her hands, walked past him, and slammed her bedroom door shut. Inside, her hands trembled as she held the chair tighter against the door, willing the wood to protect her from evil. When Ngozi returned home later that evening, Kamsi summoned the courage to try again. Her voice was loud, her tears honest, her story clear. She told her everything, about the kitchen, the comments, the bathroom incident, the silence in the dark. Ngozi stood silently as her daughter poured out her pain. For a moment, Kamsi thought she saw something crack in her mother's eyes. But then, like a storm snapping a tree, Ngozi's voice exploded. You just want to scatter everything, she screamed. You want to ruin my life because yours is miserable. Every time I find peace, you show up with stories. Kamsi's mouth dropped. Peace, she whispered. That's what you call this. But Ngozi wasn't listening. She paced back and forth, hissing, banging her fists against the table. You just want me to be alone forever. Is that it? You think any man will stay if his woman's daughter is this disrespectful? The pain didn't come as tears this time. It settled in Kamsi's chest like acid, slow, burning, final. Her mother had chosen, and she was not the choice. From that night, Patrick stopped pretending. He walked past her, smirking, making loud jokes on phone calls while pointing in her direction. Kamsi avoided him at all costs. She bathed at dawn, locked herself in whenever Ngozi wasn't around, and barely ate. The house that once held laughter now held her fear. Even the walls felt like they watched her. At school, she began withdrawing. Her teachers noticed her change, but she smiled too much and spoke too little for anyone to truly ask what was wrong. Mama Chinyere, the old woman who sold boiled corn outside their gate, once asked, "Are you okay, my Pekin?" Kamsi wanted to say no. She wanted to scream. But all she said was, "I'm fine, Ma." That evening, as the sun faded behind cracked roofs and shouting neighbors, Kamsi looked into the mirror and whispered, "This house will break me if I stay much longer." What she didn't know was that the breaking point was only a few days away, and it would come not from Patrick, but from the woman who once sang her lullabies. It began subtly. Patrick started staying longer, and Ngozi began sending Kamsi on endless errands. Go and buy kerosene. Go and collect the clothes from a tailor. Go and give Mama Titi her change. Every hour felt like exile from her own home. Then one afternoon, after coming back from a tailor, Kamsi overheard them talking in the backyard. Patrick's voice was slick as oil, calculated and soft. "She walks around this house like she owns it. She doesn't greet me. Always rolling her eyes. Madam, you need to control that girl before she destroys your peace." Ngozi, instead of defending her daughter, sighed deeply. "I don't know what to do with her anymore. Maybe she's possessed." Kamsi froze behind the wall, her heart shattering again. She had always feared her mother didn't believe her. Now, she knew for certain. The man violating her safety was the one shaping her mother's opinion of her. And her mother? She was letting him do it without resistance. That day, Kamsi stopped praying for protection. She started praying for escape. The final blow came during dinner. They sat in awkward silence, the stew untouched in her bowl. Patrick was loud as always, joking about how girls of nowadays know too much too fast. Then, with a false chuckle, he said, "Kamsi here is acting like a married woman, always walking around with chest high, as if someone sent her." Ngozi laughed. Actually laughed. Kamsi looked up from her bowl in horror. "You find that funny?" she asked. The silence that followed was sharp. Ngozi stood up so quickly the bench scraped the floor. "Are you talking back at me?" she screamed. Kamsi blinked. "You let him insult me, and you laugh, Mama?" Ngozi stepped forward and, in a move Kamsi never saw coming, raised her hand and slapped her, hard. The sound echoed through the small parlor. Kamsi clutched her cheek, stunned. Her mother had never laid a finger on her, not even when she failed math or tore her school uniform. But now she had hit her, because of a man. Patrick just smiled and stood to wash his hands, satisfied. That night, Kamsi didn't cry. Instead, she packed her school bag, folded 3 changes of clothes into a plastic bag, and wrote a short note she didn't intend to give anyone. "If anything happens to me, it started with this man you brought into our home. And you let it happen, Mama. You let it." She slid it under her pillow. Her heart felt like stone now. Cold. Numb. Empty. Her door creaked open in the middle of the night, but she had tied the lock from inside. She listened to the footsteps retreat. Her breath was calm, steady. She no longer prayed for her mother to believe her. She had accepted the truth. Ngozi didn't want to believe, because belief came with responsibility, and her mother had chosen comfort over truth. As she stared at the ceiling, sleep escaping her eyes, Kamsi whispered, "I have no mother." And in that sentence, something inside her broke for the final time. Days after the slap, the house no longer felt like a home. Kamsi became a stranger in her own space, watching her mother set out food only for Patrick, hearing her name mentioned like a problem, feeling the growing coldness with every passing hour. It was no longer silent hostility. It was organized exclusion. Ngozi stopped asking if she had eaten, stopped waiting for her to return from school, stopped speaking to her except when she was shouting. Patrick took over everything. He held the house keys, he moved furniture. He even began referring to the place as my house in casual conversation. Kamsi's belongings were moved to the box room near the entrance, a dusty former store that barely had space for her mattress. "You'll stay here for now," Ngozi said without looking her in the eyes. It's better. Patrick needs the back room for privacy. Kamsi didn't argue. She just nodded. If she spoke, she might break. And she didn't want them to see her break. Not yet. The box room was small, poorly ventilated, and right by the front door, a place meant for brooms and old basins, not a human being. At night, she would hear Patrick's voice floating through the walls, laughing, commanding, sometimes shouting. She would curl up with her father's photo pressed against her chest, whispering through clenched teeth, "I won't let them destroy me." But the hardest part wasn't Patrick's presence. It was her mother's absence. Even though she was alive and just one room away, Ngozi felt dead to her. There was no warmth, no recognition, no memory of who they used to be. This was a woman who once sat under the mango tree telling her folk tales, who used to wipe her nose with her wrapper and say, "My daughter, you're the only reason I breathe." Now that woman wouldn't even ask if she had malaria when she shivered. Kamsi stopped hoping for an apology. She started hoping for a way out. Then came the night that confirmed she was no longer safe. She had just finished brushing her teeth and returned to her room when she heard a soft tap at the door. She froze. Another tap, followed by silence. She held her breath. Then, slowly, the door handle twisted. Thank God for the rope she always used to secure the lock from inside. The door refused to open. Whoever it was, and she knew who it was, tried again, gently this time, almost testing the strength of her barrier. Her heart pounded, so loud she feared it would burst through her ribs. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. But the fear didn't. It remained with her all night, wrapping itself around her like smoke. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the door until morning. The truth was no longer hidden. Patrick had moved from words to actions. He was not waiting for permission anymore. And her mother? She was still asleep or pretending not to hear. The sun rose without mercy the next morning, casting harsh light on everything Kamsi had tried to hide in the shadows. Her eyes were sunken from sleeplessness, her movements robotic. She didn't speak to anyone that day, but her silence screamed louder than her voice ever could. Ngozi barely noticed. She was too busy preparing food for Patrick, ironing his shirts, humming loudly as if the house was filled with joy instead of tension. That evening, while Ngozi was still at the market, Patrick returned home earlier than expected. Kamsi immediately locked herself in, pressing her back against the door. She heard him enter the house, humming an old highlife tune, footsteps echoing too close. Then came the knock, not gentle this time, but sharp, deliberate. "Kamsi," he called, "open the door. I want to help you fix the curtain rod. I saw it shaking yesterday." Kamsi said nothing. Her body was frozen, mind racing. "Don't be silly," he said again. "You know no one else will believe you." That sentence, that quiet threat, that manipulation soaked in confidence. It cracked something inside her soul. Without responding, Kamsi reached for her school bag and slowly pulled out the large hardcover Bible her father had given her before he died. She sat there with it clutched to her chest as Patrick continued to talk outside. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just prayed in her heart that he would go away, and somehow, after a few minutes, he did. The front door slammed, and the silence returned like a wave. When Ngozi got back that night, Kamsi didn't wait for her to settle. She stepped into the sitting room, stood in front of her mother, and said, "He tried to come into my room again. This time to touch me. Do you need proof, Mama?" Ngozi looked up from unpacking her tomatoes, confused, irritated. Patrick came out of the kitchen, pretending to yawn, acting clueless. "What's she saying?" he asked, feigning innocence. Ngozi rose slowly, eyes bouncing between them. "Kamsi," she said, voice low but sharp, "are you possessed? Why do you hate this man so much?" Kamsi couldn't believe it. "You really think I'm making it up?" she asked. Patrick put his hand to his chest. "God knows I see this girl as my own child. She's the one acting funny." It escalated quickly. Ngozi accused her of being jealous, of being a bitter teenager craving attention. "You want to ruin my life just like your father did," she shouted. That sentence nearly knocked the breath out of Kamsi. "My father loved us," she cried. "He would never let this happen." Patrick pretended to look hurt. "Maybe you should take her for deliverance," he muttered. or to a school hostel. But Ngozi had already made up her mind. She walked into Kamsi's room, grabbed her pillow, and tossed it into the corridor. "You want to destroy me because I'm trying to find happiness again," she screamed. "You're cursed, Kamsi. Cursed." That night, for the first time in her life, Kamsi saw a mother more dangerous than any stranger. Not because she couldn't see the truth, but because she refused to. Patrick had won, and Kamsi had lost the one person she thought would never turn against her. The sky was already overcast when it happened, the clouds heavy with the kind of sorrow that mirrored Kamsi's chest. She was in the small room, sitting quietly, still in her school uniform, when Ngozi barged in without knocking. "Pack your things," she said coldly. "You want to fight me in my own house? Then leave." Kamsi looked up, heart racing. "Mama, where should I go?" Ngozi didn't respond. She stormed out and returned with a black nylon bag containing Kamsi's clothes, some of which were still wet, pulled straight from the line. "I said leave, before I do something I'll regret," she hissed. Kamsi's lips trembled. "Mama, please. I have nowhere to go." Behind her, Patrick leaned against the wall, smirking. "It's for the best. When she learns respect, she can come back." That broke her. She grabbed the bag, her father's photo clutched tightly under her armpit, and walked toward the door. Ngozi didn't look at her. She didn't even blink. Kamsi turned at the entrance, eyes full of tears. "You threw me out for him?" Ngozi looked away. "Go before you cause more shame." Outside, the rain started slowly, like grief building in the chest. Kamsi stood at the gate for a moment, shivering, waiting to see if her mother would call her back. She didn't. The wind howled through the street, blowing dust and paper into the gutters. Neighbors watched silently, some whispering, others turning away. Nobody offered shelter. Nobody asked why a 16-year-old girl was standing barefoot in the rain with a plastic bag and tears on her face. Her slippers squelched as she began walking, not toward anywhere in particular, just away. Away from betrayal. Away from silence. Away from the home that had turned into a grave. With each step, the rain pounded harder, soaking her uniform, her bag, her soul. She tried not to cry out loud. She tried not to collapse. Her father's picture was still dry, tucked under her clothes, the only warmth she had left. She passed Mama Titi's stall, then Mama Chinyer's kiosk. She almost kept walking, but the old woman saw her through the rain. "Kamsi." Mama Chinyer called, stepping out with her wrapper clutched tightly. Kamsi turned slowly, lips trembling. "Mama, she threw me out." That was all she managed to say before her knees gave way. Mama Chinyer caught her just before she hit the ground, dragging her inside the tiny zinc shelter. She wiped Kamsi's face with her old scarf, muttering prayers and curses under her breath. "God will judge that woman," she hissed. Kamsi sat curled up on a wooden bench, rainwater dripping from her skirt. Her body was shaking, but her voice was steady now. "I'll survive," she whispered. "Even if I have to start from the dust, I'll survive." And with that vow, a seed of strength began to take root inside her, a strength born not from comfort or family, but from pain. Her journey to becoming a millionaire didn't start in a classroom. It started in that moment, on that bench, in the middle of the storm her mother helped create. The air inside Mama Chinyer's small shack smelled of rain-dampened firewood, worn wrappers, and old palm oil. It was a one-room space built from zinc sheets, barely holding itself together, but to Kamsi, it felt safer than the house she had just left. She sat on a wooden chair by the smoky corner, wrapped in a faded towel Mama Chinyer had dug out from an old basin. Her clothes hung near the door, dripping. The woman moved about slowly, grumbling to herself as she warmed leftover yam on a coal stove. "This world has turned upside down," she muttered. "Mothers throwing away daughters for strangers. God forbid." Kamsi didn't speak much. Her eyes were swollen, her chest heavy, her body aching. But even in that silence, she made one quiet vow to herself. "I will never return to that house. Not as a beggar. Not as a broken girl. If I ever go back, it will be as a woman they'll regret underestimating." She didn't know how or when, But she was sure of it. Pain had become her fuel. That first night was hard. The rain leaked through the roof, and rats scurried behind the plastic buckets. Kamsi didn't sleep, not because she was scared of the room, but because the weight of betrayal refused to let her rest. She stared at the ceiling in the dark, clutching her father's photo tightly. She remembered the way he used to call her my lion, how he told her, even if the world turns on you, never turn on yourself. Those words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. Around midnight, she finally whispered to Mama Chinyere, "I'll work, Ma. Anything you want me to do. I don't want to sit idle." The old woman, half asleep, stirred and smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, you'll follow me to sell tomatoes. And you'll sweep for Madame Ngozi across the road. She pays 50 naira per compound." Kamsi nodded. It was humiliating, yes, but it was a beginning. She had nothing left to protect but her dignity. And if she had to rebuild her life from the gutter, she would, but it would be on her own terms. By the following week, Kamsi had become a familiar face in the area. She hawked sachet water in traffic during the day, cleaned compounds early in the morning, and ran errands for market women in the evening. Her hands grew rough, her back ached, and she lost more weight than she could afford. But there was a fire in her eyes, a determination no one could extinguish. Every naira she made, she saved. Every insult she heard, she swallowed. One evening, after selling all her water and returning to Mama Chinyere's place, she found a young boy crying near a gutter. She sat with him, shared her dinner, and told him gently, "It won't always be like this." That's when she realized something important. Suffering had made her stronger, but it hadn't made her cruel. And that small piece of humanity she still carried, that would become her greatest asset. Because the world would remember not just what she endured, but the grace with which she endured it. Kamsi's first encounter with a computer after her downfall happened by accident. She had just finished cleaning a small office building when she peeked into one of the rooms and saw a young woman typing furiously on a laptop. The screen glowed like magic. She didn't even know what the girl was doing. But the sound of the keys, the rhythm, the speed, the power, it felt like something far away from pain, from poverty, from betrayal. That night, as she sat beside Mama Chinyere peeling egusi, her thoughts refused to rest. "I want to learn something," she said finally. "Not tailoring or hair. Something new." The old woman looked at her with tired eyes, but nodded. "There's a library near the school compound. It has computers, but you can't touch them unless you're a student." Kamsi's heart sank, but the seed was planted. The next morning, she cleaned faster than usual and walked to the library, wearing her old school uniform so she wouldn't be turned away. It was a lie, but not one she felt guilty about. Desperation wasn't always dishonest. Sometimes it was just survival. At first she only watched. She would sit quietly in the corner while others typed and clicked. She memorized where fingers landed, how the mouse moved, what icons they clicked. Then she started writing things down, shortcuts, commands, words she didn't understand. Google became her classroom. Wikipedia, her textbook. YouTube tutorials, watched through library computers with bad headphones, became her lectures. She would spend hours watching free coding lessons with no sound, just subtitles, scribbling each step into her notebook. The librarian, an older man with thick glasses, noticed her dedication. After a while, he began allowing her extra time when the place was quiet. "You learn fast," he once said. "Faster than most of the students who pay fees." She smiled, thanked him, and promised herself she wouldn't waste his kindness. Her body still carried the marks of struggle, peeling skin, cracked heels, blisters from hawking, but her mind was sharpening like a blade. Then came Emeka, a boy from her former school. He had been one of the quiet ones, always in the back row, rarely noticed. He saw her at the library one day, hunched over a dusty keyboard, and his jaw dropped. "Kamsi," he asked. She turned, surprised. He told her he was attending a free tech boot camp sponsored by an NGO, and after some hesitation, he offered to sneak her in. "They won't let you register now, but I can help you get in after hours." That week, he began sharing assignments with her. He gave her old handouts, taught her the basics of HTML and CSS, and encouraged her when she got things wrong. Kamsi devoured every lesson like it was oxygen. Her nights were now spent not just surviving, but building. For the first time since her exile, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a fighter with a plan. Every code she wrote, every line she learned, was a small rebellion against everything Patrick and her mother had stolen from her. The moment Kamsi received her first payment, her hands trembled so much she nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't a huge sum, 400,000 Nigerian nairas, but to her it was like being handed the keys to another world. A small logistics company in the area needed a simple inventory management system. Emeka had passed the gig to her, saying, "They don't have much budget, but I think you can do it." Kamsi stayed up for 3 nights straight, fueled by Gary and hope, debugging, learning on the job, watching tutorial after tutorial until her eyes hurt. And when she finally sent the finished software, she expected them to reject it. But they didn't. They called her the next day, praised her, and wired the money to her OPI account. When she saw the notification, she didn't scream. She didn't jump. She just sat on Mama Chinyer's wooden chair and wept, silent, broken, healing tears. That money wasn't just income. It was proof. Proof that her pain had not killed her, that her struggle was beginning to take shape. She whispered, "Papa, I'm doing it. I'm doing it without them." She didn't waste a single naira. She used part of the money to buy an old refurbished laptop from Computer Village and paid 1 year's rent for a corner in an internet cafe where she could work daily without interruption. The rest she invested into online learning platforms, using VPN tricks to access free courses from international coding websites. Her mind was unstoppable now, and so was her discipline. She woke at 5 a.m., cleaned 2 houses for Mama Chinyer's friends, and then worked until midnight at the cafe. She didn't care about makeup or clothes. She wore the same outfits, carried the same backpack, and ignored the stares of men who thought her poverty made her cheap. Her goal was singular: to never need anyone's roof again, especially her mother's. She never told Ngozi she was still alive, never reached out, never checked back. "Let them wonder," she'd say to herself. "Let them hear my name in places they never thought possible." What made Kamsi different wasn't just her skill, it was her story. She began freelancing for local businesses, offering custom systems for market women, stock managers, and printing companies. Word of mouth spread quickly. Everyone wanted the silent girl who delivered on time and didn't talk too much. By 18, she had saved over 2.5 million Nigerian nairas, registered her own mini software brand, and begun mentoring other street kids who reminded her of herself. She gave them code books, old phones, even money for food. But she never bragged, never posted about her pain, never chased social media. She remained quiet, hidden, purposeful. Because in her mind, the day she would return wasn't for applause. It was for confrontation. And as she stared into her cracked laptop screen one evening, coding through a thunderstorm, she whispered, "Soon they'll know what I became after they buried me alive." Time has a cruel way of repeating lessons for those who refuse to learn them. 2 years after Kamsi was thrown out, the same man her mother defended with fire began showing his true form without masks. Patrick no longer pretended to be sweet or respectful. The charm had expired, and all that remained was power and possession. The neighbors whispered about it long before Ngozi admitted it. "That man shouts too much. He slapped her in the market last week. She wears sunglasses even when it's not sunny." The signs were there. Bruises hidden under foundation. Limping steps explained away as "I fell on wet tiles." But those who knew her story understood. The hunter had turned on his keeper. Patrick no longer needed to deceive. He had already stripped Ngozi of her pride, her independence, and now her dignity. The same woman who once told Kamsi to leave before I do something I'll regret, now flinched at the clap of a car door. Karma didn't need permission to enter. It simply walked through the same gate where love was evicted. Kamsi heard about it not from gossip, but from observation. She had grown too smart to waste energy tracking those who betrayed her, but pain has a way of finding you, even when you don't look. She was passing through the local market to meet a new client when she saw her. Ngozi was bent beside a table of plantain, her hair unkempt, one side of her face slightly swollen, Her lips cracked. She was haggling over money, like someone who once forgot what it meant to be desperate. Kamsi paused. For a moment, she wanted to walk past. Pretend she didn't see her. But something rooted her legs to the earth. Their eyes met. Ngozi's mouth parted in a gasp, as if seeing a ghost. Her daughter, the one she called cursed, the one she never looked for, was now standing before her in jeans, sneakers, clean skin, glowing composure, holding a laptop bag worth more than the entire market stall. Kamsi didn't speak. She didn't even blink. She just looked, long enough to let the silence carry her strength. Then she turned and walked away. That night, Kamsi sat with Mama Chinyere, sipping pap under the moonlight, silent. The older woman noticed her mood. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked softly. Kamsi nodded. "She looks like someone who's aging backwards into pain," she whispered. "He's destroying her slowly, just like he tried to destroy me." Mama Chinyere sighed. "And yet, it took all this before she believed you." Kamsi stared up at the stars. "I don't pity her," she said. "But I also don't rejoice." She stood up, stretched, and added, "He'll come for me next. I can feel it." And she was right. Because predators don't change, they just change tactics. Patrick had broken Ngozi down so completely that now the only thing left to take was the one thing that had escaped his grip all those years ago, the girl he once tried to silence. The first message came through a strange number. Kamsi was at her cafe corner when her phone buzzed with a text. "Kamsi, it's your mother. Please, can we talk?" She stared at the screen for a long time, unmoving. The name wasn't saved. There were no emojis, no long apologies. Just a plain, fragile message. She didn't reply. 2 days later, the number called. She ignored it. Then the messages began to escalate. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm not well. I need your help. Patrick lost his job. We don't have food. Please, you're my daughter. Please." Kamsi wasn't a monster. She felt the pangs of memory, of birthdays, lullabies, and market trips, holding her mother's hand. But those memories were tangled with pain, abandonment, and betrayal. She couldn't separate the two. That evening, she received another message. "If you don't help her, anything that happens will be on your head." This one wasn't from Ngozi. It came from Patrick. And it confirmed what she already suspected. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted access. Her silence had become a threat. And now, they would use the woman who once cast her into the street to break her defenses. Kamsi didn't react emotionally. She had spent years training herself to respond with strategy, not sentiment. She went quiet, not from fear, but preparation. She began digging. Through friends in cybersecurity, she traced Patrick's phone records. He had been speaking to loan sharks, betting agencies, and even someone who offered dirty deals in exchange for access to personal information. He was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. Meanwhile, she discovered that Ngozi had been hospitalized twice in the past month, once for physical trauma, once for internal stress complications. The woman who once said, "You're cursed," now couldn't even afford malaria treatment. Kamsi stared at the file, heart hard. Mama Chinyere, watching her from across the room, asked gently, "Will you forgive her?" Kamsi didn't look up. "I'll help her," she said. "But not for her sake. For mine." Because what Kamsi needed now wasn't revenge. It was closure. She had risen. She had grown. But her healing wouldn't be complete until she faced the demons in the same room they were birthed. She crafted her plan with precision. First, she arranged a casual meetup, a lunch at a restaurant not far from her new office. She made the reservation herself, notified the staff, and even booked a discreet security team to wait outside. She told Ngozi to come alone, but she knew Patrick would come too. People like him don't respect boundaries. They feed on moments like this. The trap was set. The voice notes, the call logs, the blackmail messages, all of it had been saved. And soon it would all come to light. Kamsi stood in front of the mirror the morning of the meeting, adjusting the pearl earrings she had bought herself from her first million. She wore a simple white shirt, fitted black pants, and braided her hair back just like her mother used to when she was a child. She looked at her reflection, not with vanity, but with reflection. Let's end what you started, she said softly. And then she left, not as a girl coming to beg, but as a woman coming to close the final chapter. The restaurant was quiet when Kamsi arrived, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She chose a seat near the window, where the light filtered in gently, enough for clarity, but not too bright to feel exposed. She sat with a bottle of water, waiting. When Ngozi walked in, her appearance was a ghost of the woman Kamsi remembered. Her wrapper was too thin for the air conditioning, her eyes swollen, her gait slow and cautious. She looked around, unsure, until her eyes landed on Kamsi, tall, poised, clean. For a moment, the older woman froze, her lips trembling. Kamsi stood slightly, gestured to the chair opposite her. No words yet. Just formality. Ngozi Saturday, thank you for seeing me, she whispered. Kamsi nodded. You said you wanted to talk. There was a long silence. Then, suddenly, Ngozi's eyes filled with tears. I was wrong, Kamsi. I was blind. He ruined me. I see it now. Kamsi's face remained unreadable. And now that you see it, what do you want? She asked, voice even. Before Ngozi could answer, Patrick strolled in, bold, smirking, confident like a man who believed he still held power. Ah, my girl is blown, oh, he announced, drawing attention from nearby tables. Fine car, big phone, soft skin. You know they even greet your elders again? Kamsi didn't flinch. She gestured to the seat beside Ngozi. Sit down. He did, crossing his legs arrogantly. Let's stop pretending, he said. Your mama is suffering. You're up. Just help us small. Kamsi leaned forward. Help you, she asked. The man who tried to destroy me? Patrick chuckled. That one don't pass. Water under bridge. Make we move on. Kamsi placed a flash drive on the table. This contains your voice notes threatening to release fake videos. It also has screenshots of your betting debts and threats to assault my mother if she doesn't call me. Patrick's smile disappeared. Wouldn't be this one, he asked, eyes narrowing. Kamsi stood slowly. You were right. Let's move on. But you'll do it in handcuffs. As if on cue, two plain-clothed officers entered and walked straight to their table. Patrick tried to run. One of them grabbed his wrist before he could stand. Mr. Patrick Aswyke, you are under arrest for attempted extortion, harassment, and fraud. The restaurant went quiet. Ngozi gasped, her hand flying to her chest. What's happening? She asked in shock. Kamsi turned to her, finally softening. You're not the one I came to destroy, Mama. I came to end the person who used you to break me. Patrick struggled, screamed, cursed, but was dragged out like a bag of shame. Kamsi sat back down and stared at her mother. Now tell me the truth, she said quietly. Was he worth throwing me away for? Ngozi opened her mouth, but the words failed her. Her tears did not. Kamsi stood again, picked up her bag, and said, You'll be fine. But not with me. Then she walked out, head held high, her reflection in the glass door showing not a victim, but a woman reborn from fire. When the police van door slammed behind Patrick that day, the noise echoed louder in Kamsi's mind than she expected. It wasn't just the sound of metal. It was the sound of justice catching up to a man who had believed himself untouchable. She stood outside the restaurant, watching as he struggled, cursing and shouting. You'll regret this. I'll come back. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. For the first time in years, Kamsi felt something close to release. It wasn't joy. It wasn't satisfaction. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when an open wound finally begins to close. The officers led him into the van, and as the engine rumbled to life, Kamsi turned away, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the realization that the cycle had finally ended. The monster who ruined her childhood, destroyed her home, and broke her mother's mind would now face the world he had built, a world of consequences. Ngozi sat in the restaurant long after the van left, staring blankly at the half-empty plate of rice before her. Her fingers were trembling, her lips quivering, her eyes hollow. You believed him over your own blood, Kamsi said softly, standing beside her. And this is what you chose. Her voice didn't carry anger anymore, it carried truth, heavy and unpolished. Ngozi shook her head slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting myself," she whispered. "I thought I needed someone. I was afraid of being alone." Kamsi's eyes softened slightly. "You weren't protecting yourself. You were destroying the only person who loved you without condition." She picked up her bag, placed a small brown envelope on the table, and said, "There's enough money there for food and a place to stay. But after today, I'm done trying to save what you let die." She turned to leave, her steps steady. Behind her, Ngozi sobbed quietly, clutching the envelope like a lifeline she didn't deserve. Outside, Kamsi stood by her car for a long moment before getting in. The sky was dim, the wind cool, the kind of weather that carried reflection. She leaned against the door, watching people cross the street, watching life move on. It hit her then that survival had taken everything from her, her innocence, her trust, her youth. Yet, somehow, it had also given her strength. The world hadn't made her heart hard, it had made it wise. She remembered her father's words, "If life ever knocks you down, rise, but don't rise bitter." For the first time since she was 16, she felt that truth take root inside her. As she drove home, her phone buzzed, a message from the police confirming Patrick's detention and court processing. She didn't reply. She simply looked out the window and whispered, "Karma doesn't miss." For once, she didn't have to fight. Life had done the fighting for her. The next morning, Kamsi woke before sunrise, unable to sleep. Her mind was quiet but restless, a strange balance between exhaustion and relief. She made a simple decision. It was time to go home, not to the house she was cast out from, but to the one place that had never turned its back on her, her father's grave. She drove for 2 hours to her village, where red dust covered the narrow roads and the air smelled of earth after rain. She parked under a large mango tree, stepped out, and followed the familiar path behind the Anglican churchyard. There it was, the small cement grave marked, "Here rests Mr. Emmanuel Okafor, beloved husband and father." The paint was fading, the flowers long dead, but it still felt like peace. She knelt, pressing her palm to the cool surface. "Papa," she whispered, "I made it. They said I wouldn't, but I did." Her voice trembled, the words catching in her throat. "I wish you were here to see me. I wish you could have stopped her before she lost herself." She sat there for a long time, talking like he could hear her, telling him about her work, her struggles, and how the world had shaped her into someone he'd be proud of. "They tried to break me," she said softly, "but I used the pieces to build a life." She took out a folded paper, an old, faded letter she had written years ago in Mama Chinyer's house, one she had never read aloud. It was a letter filled with fear, questions, and anger. She placed it on the grave and smiled faintly. "I don't need this anymore," she said. "You taught me that love is not weakness, it's strength. And I'll keep loving, not them, but the life you wanted for me." She sat in silence, listening to the birds. The morning light fell across her face, and for the first time, she didn't feel haunted by the past. She felt grounded, whole. The child who once cried by this grave now returned as a woman who had learned how to stand on her own scars. Before leaving, she brought out a small bouquet of fresh white lilies and laid them at the base of the grave. "I've opened a tech school, Papa," she said quietly. "It's for girls like me, the forgotten ones. I named it after you." She smiled through tears. "It's called Lion Code Foundation, because you always called me your lion." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above, and in that whisper of wind she felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as a calm reminder that love never really dies. As she walked back to her car, she looked at the sunrise peeking over the hills and realized she had finally reached a place where pain no longer dictated her purpose. What came next wasn't revenge or anger. It was legacy, and she was ready to build it, piece by piece, just like her father would have wanted. Weeks later, news reached Kamsi through a friend in social welfare that her mother had been admitted into a women's shelter. The details were vague. She had been found unconscious near a small kiosk, badly bruised, dehydrated, and disoriented. Kamsi read the report twice, expression unreadable. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply folded the paper and sat back in her office chair, staring at the window. The city skyline outside glittered under the evening sun, a world she had built with her own hands. Yet part of her heart still carried the weight of the woman who never saw her worth until it was too late. After a long silence, she stood up, walked to her desk, and wrote a short letter. She signed it with Mama Chinyer's name, not hers, and attached an envelope of cash along with a short note. This should cover her stay and food. She deserves a chance to rest. Please don't tell her who paid. Then she called the shelter directly, voice steady but distant, and arranged for monthly anonymous donations. She didn't want thanks. She wanted peace. At the shelter, Ngozi lived in a small cubicle with white walls, a narrow bed, and a wooden locker. She looked smaller now, thinner, quieter, her once sharp voice replaced with soft murmurs. Every evening, she would sit by the window, watching other women share stories about abusive men, lost children, and regrets. Sometimes she joined in. Other times, she simply listened. One night, she told the matron, "I had a daughter once. I don't know where she is now. I don't think she'll ever forgive me." The matron, who knew more than she let on, just smiled gently. "Maybe forgiveness isn't the point," she said. "Maybe surviving long enough to wish for it is." Ngozi wept quietly, realizing that survival itself was a mercy she didn't earn. She began helping in the shelter kitchen, cooking and cleaning, finding purpose in the small things, in feeding other broken women who reminded her of the daughter she lost. Kamsi never visited, but sometimes she drove past the shelter late at night, parking across the road and watching through the gate. She'd see women gathered around the courtyard light, laughing softly. Once, she spotted Ngozi's silhouette, the familiar posture, the way she wrapped her scarf twice around her head, the slow way she walked. It made her heart ache, not with hatred anymore, but with acceptance. "She's paying her price," Kamsi whispered, "and I've paid mine." Then she drove away, leaving the sound of the shelter gate behind her. At home, she opened her father's photo again and smiled. "I did what you do," she said. "I helped her, even when she didn't deserve it." Her voice was calm, her heart lighter. Forgiveness wasn't about pretending nothing happened. It was about no longer letting it define her. And that night, as she drifted off to sleep, she dreamt not of betrayal, but of peace, a kind of peace that comes only after walking through fire and realizing you didn't burn, you transformed. The sun rose early that morning, bright and full, not just in the sky, but in Kamsi's spirit. It was the official launch of the Lion Code Foundation, her tech school for girls abandoned by society, by family, or by fate. The white building stood proud in the center of the community that once mocked her, surrounded by students in donated uniforms, banners fluttering gently above the gate. From pain to power, from silence to code. She stood at the podium in a simple Ankara dress, her hair tied back, no makeup except the calm on her face. Cameras flashed, local officials nodded, and her students, some as young as 10, watched with wide, hopeful eyes. When she took the mic, the room went still. "I want to tell you a story," she began, "about a girl who was thrown out in the rain at 16 with nothing but a plastic bag and her father's photo." The room didn't breathe. She continued, voice even, but firm. She had no house, no job, no mother to fight for her. Only an old woman who gave her a wooden chair to sleep on. That girl hawked water, swept compounds, and watched the same people who broke her pretend she didn't exist. Her voice trembled slightly, but didn't crack. But she learned something no one could take. Not beauty, not fame. She learned skill. Code. Discipline. Focus. And today that girl is me. The room erupted in soft applause, many wiping tears quietly. She held up a tablet. "This is your tool now. Not begging. Not waiting for a man. This." Her voice was sharp now, electric. "Because you are not worthless. You are not cursed. You are not what they called you. You are the future, and no one is allowed to write your story except you." As the event ended and she walked through the crowd, shaking hands and receiving hugs, a quiet voice whispered in her heart. It wasn't her mother's. It wasn't Patrick's. It was her own, that little girl inside her who had once asked, "Why did she choose him over me?" And for the first time, the voice no longer carried pain. Kamsi had not just built a tech school. She had built herself. She had rewritten the meaning of her name, her legacy, her story. Later that night, as she sat on her bed going through notes and sponsor messages, she found a letter tucked into a gift bag. It was from one of the young girls at the event. "Auntie Kamsi, I want to be just like you. Thank you for showing me that being thrown away doesn't mean I'm trash. I'm a seed." Kamsi held the note to her chest and wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had finally forgiven the only person she had blamed the most, herself. It happened on a Monday morning. Kamsi was reviewing student progress charts when she got a call from a shelter. The matron's voice was gentle. "Ngozi collapsed this morning. She's in the hospital." Kamsi froze. It felt like someone had pulled the ground from under her. "She's alive," the woman continued, "but weak. You don't have to come. We just thought you should know." Kamsi didn't hesitate. She drove quietly, no music, no phone calls, just the hum of the road and the rhythm of her heartbeat. When she arrived at the hospital, the nurses were surprised. "Are you her daughter?" one asked. She nodded slowly. "I was once." The ward was quiet. Ngozi lay on the bed, eyes closed, tubes in her arms, her frame thinner than she remembered. Her face was pale, but peaceful. Kamsi sat beside her, unsure whether to speak. Her fingers hovered near her mother's hand, but didn't touch. Then, suddenly, as if sensing her presence, Ngozi stirred, eyes fluttering open. Her gaze was weak, watery, but when she saw Kamsi, something flickered inside her. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Kamsi leaned closer. "Don't speak," she said softly. "Just rest." But Ngozi lifted a trembling hand and touched Kamsi's fingers. "My daughter," she whispered. It was the first time in over a decade she had called her that. Kamsi's lips quivered. "I'm here, Mama," she replied, tears threatening to fall. "I never wanted to hate you. I just wanted you to protect me." Ngozi blinked slowly. "I see it now, too late," she murmured. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Kamsi nodded, holding her hand now. "I know. And I forgive you." Ngozi smiled faintly, tears rolling down her cheeks. The two women sat like that for minutes, saying everything and nothing, healing a wound that had stretched too long. In that moment, mother and daughter finally met again, not in a kitchen, not in a fight, not in the rain, but in truth. And it was enough. Ngozi passed away peacefully 3 days later, just before dawn. Kamsi arranged her burial quietly, away from public eyes. No lavish ceremony, just a simple casket, a white cloth, and a note placed inside her mother's hand. "You lost your way, but I found mine." At the funeral, Mama Chinyere stood beside Kamsi, holding her like she did years ago. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," she said. Kamsi smiled through her grief. "I had to be. The world didn't give me another option." As they lowered the casket into the ground, Kamsi didn't weep loudly. She stood tall, her hands clasped, her heart calm. She didn't cry because she was finally empty of pain. She had let go, not to forget, but to grow. That night, as she returned home, she framed the old photo of her father and placed it beside her desk. Beside it, she placed one of herself, not smiling, not sad, just whole. The girl who was thrown out at 16 had come back not to prove anything, but to show the world that even broken seeds bloom if planted in strength. And bloom she did. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.